Sometimes you need to connect to two networks where the VLAN numbers don't match. Changing either side just isn't practical. That's where one-to-one VLAN mapping comes in. In this first of a two-part episode of Cisco Tech Talk, I'll show you how to configure one-to-one VLAN mapping on a Cisco Catalyst 1300 switch. Next. I'll start with the topology I'll use for the demonstration. I'm connecting a customer network into a provider network. I have two Catalyst 1200 switches acting as the customer provider equipment, CPE network. Each of these switches has a PC connected to VLAN 9 so I can test end-to-end connectivity. In the middle of the network are Catalyst 1300 switches, which represent the provider equipment, PE network. On the Catalyst 1300 switches, I will use VLAN 11. The goal is to translate VLAN 9 from the customer side into VLAN 11 across the provider network, using one-to-one VLAN mapping. I'll start by configuring one of the CPE switches using the Graphical User Interface GUI. This is the switch you see here. The first step is to create the VLAN you'll be using. From the GUI, I'll go into VLAN Management, then VLAN Settings, and create VLAN 9. Next, configure the ports on the switch. Port 1 will connect to the PE network, so it needs to be configured accordingly. Under VLAN Management and Interface Settings, I'll edit port 1 and set it as the trunk port. From the port to VLAN membership settings, join the VLAN and define the native VLAN as none. This is important because the device on the other side does not use a native VLAN. This helps avoid native VLAN mismatch errors. After that, disable Smart Port on this interface. To do this, I'll go to Smart Port Interface Settings, select Port 1, edit it, choose Disable, and apply the change. Now I need to configure the port where one of the test PCs will be connected. Going back to the VLAN Management section for the VLAN membership, edit the port. This port will be configured as an access port and assigned to VLAN 9. And with that, the required settings on the CPE switch are complete. Now I can move on to the first PE switch, a Catalyst 1300. From here, I'll again go to VLAN Management and create the VLANs needed for this demonstration, which are VLAN 9 and VLAN 11. One important requirement on the Catalyst 1300 is that IPv4 routing must be disabled for one-to-one VLAN mapping to work. To do this, go under IPv4 configuration and disable IPv4 routing. You also need to configure hardware resources for VLAN mapping. Navigate to Administration and then Hardware Resources. Here, look at the maximum VLAN mapping entries. By default, this value is set to 0. If it remains at 0, you can't create one-to-one VLAN mappings. Since one-to-one VLAN mapping uses 2 entries per VLAN, I'll need to allocate enough resources. I'll set the value to 64 to ensure I don't run into any issues. Enter your value. Click the blinking red Save icon and then click Apply. After the change is applied, a prompt to save the running configuration and reload the device pops up. Click OK and wait for the switch to reboot. Once the switch comes back online, return to the Hardware Resource section and confirm that the new settings have been applied. The next step is to configure the port that will use one-to-one VLAN mapping. Before enabling VLAN mapping, there are a few prerequisites. First, you need to disable Spanning Tree on this port. This is done by going to Spanning Tree STP Interface Settings, editing the port, and disabling STP. You also need to disable Smart Port on the same interface. Go to Smart Port Interface Settings, edit the port, select Disable, and apply the change. Then go back to VLAN Management, Interface Settings, select the port, and select Interface VLAN Mode to VLAN Mapping 1-to-1. Click Apply. Still under VLAN Management, go to VLAN Translation, then VLAN Mapping, and add a new entry. I'll select one-to-one mapping, choose port 1, set the source VLAN as VLAN 9, and define the destination VLAN as VLAN 11. Apply the configuration. With that set, it's time to configure the second port on the Catalyst 1300 switch, which will connect the other PE switch. In this case, that's port 2. Under VLAN Management and Interface Settings, I'll select port 2 and configure it as a trunk port. Apply the change and then specify which VLANs are allowed on this trunk. While the current configuration would allow all VLANs, for this demonstration, I'll explicitly only allow VLAN 11, since that is the VLAN being carried across the provider network. On this port, disable Smart Port by going to Smart Port Interface Settings. Edit the port, select Disable, and apply the change. Save the configuration. For the remaining 2 switches in the topology, simply mirror the configurations that were just completed on the other 2. Once that's complete, the core configurations are in place. Click the link in the description for part 2, where I'll show you how to validate the setup and test connectivity. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.